The Utah women's basketball team is going dancing this week. How will their first few games of the NCAA tournament play out? And how do the corners look heading into spring ball? We're talking about that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment matter more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we're going to dive into the corners, what we think this group is going to do, how they'll perform without Clark Phillips, and the early preview and look we're going to get at these guys come spring ball. But before we do that, we got to talk about the Utah women's basketball team because they are involved in March Madness as a 2 seed. They'll be hosting a couple tournaments this week. And in order to help me talk about the Utah women's basketball team, it's friend of the show and KSL Sports, Mitchelle Bodkin. And Mitchelle, honestly, looking at the bracket overall, I do think it worked out really well for Utah. Sometimes you can get a bad draw, but especially for Utah as the host sites, first one you're going to get is Gardner-Webb. Obviously feel pretty good about that for Utah. Then NC State or Princeton, the winner of that. Look, I know Princeton only lost 5 games, but the level of competition obviously wasn't exactly there as compared to someone like NC State who was in the ACC. So either way, feel good about Utah there. And then after that, Utah will get LSU in the Sweet 16. But LSU is an interesting team because LSU is 28-2. But if you look at who they played, I mean, I know they played in the SEC, but they actually didn't play that many good opponents. Their non-conference schedule was a joke. So I feel like Utah's got a really nice path here to make a deep run. And yeah, if they make it all the way to the Elite Eight, running into one of Indiana or Villanova, that could be really tough. Indiana, especially, they're the 1 seed in that side of the bracket overall. But I feel like the bracket really worked out well for this Utah team. And look, they got kind of their disappointing loss out of the ways in some ways. I feel like it's not like they're coming out. You could look at it 2 ways. Coming off the Pac-12 championship is great. Like, you got the momentum, you're building it up. But at the same time, I think this team has just had 2 weeks to practice and work hard and kind of realize like they just had to sit with that taste of a loss in their mouth. And I feel like they're really motivated and ready to go. And I think they got a great chance to do something really special.
I think they maybe do too. It's going to be really fun to watch. It's going to be fun to have some NCAA tournament basketball back in Salt Lake. Granted, it's the women's side, but it's been a while. I think the men were here. I think Utah hosted or Salt Lake hosted back in like 2016 or 2017. Yes. So it's been a little while since we've had one of these tournaments kind of roll through, and then coming off of the heels of a big event like All-Star Weekend. I just think it's a really fun situation for Salt Lake and for Utah to kind of be back in the middle of this basketball scene. It feels like it's been football for a long time, and rightfully so. But to see basketball maybe making some waves and having a comeback here is fun. And I expect the women to do really well. They've done very well at home. They've been undefeated at home so far this year. So I don't believe there's any reason. I mean, you never want to underestimate your opponent, right? Like, that is the kiss of death. And I think maybe a little bit of that happened with Washington State in that Pac-12 tournament with a lot of people. But I think they have the building blocks, and I think they have the recipe to really kind of get this done. And as you mentioned, they've had a couple of weeks off, and that can either be a good thing or a bad thing. We'll see how kind of rusty they maybe are. Not necessarily having, been in the flow of play and game time the last couple of weeks. But at the same time, I think they were maybe starting to get a little beat up, both mentally and physically. And so I think the rest is going to be good for them. And we'll just kind of see on Friday, how things kind of shake out and where we go from there.
I mean, this team hasn't lost back-to-back games all season. They really only lost 3 games in the regular season. And as we mentioned, they lost to Washington State, but Washington State only went on to win the whole Pac-12 tournament. So obviously they got extremely hot. So it'll be interesting to see what they look like come March as well. But yeah, you got to be feeling good about this women's team, the resilience, how they respond. I think the crazy thing too is I think a lot of us expected the Utah women's team to be good this year. I think a lot of us would have said, yes, NCAA tournament. I don't remember a ton of people being like, yes, they'll be a 2 seed. They'll be able to host some early round games. I think that's what makes this season so amazing. amazing. And once again, sometimes I think I forget, and a lot of people forget, this team won 5 games 2 years ago. And now here they are in the thick of March Madness, and just have this great opportunity coming up here. So how do you feel like they will respond kind of coming off a loss? Because they've done a really good job in the regular season, but as you also said, anything can happen in March.
Yeah, I mean, we call it March Madness for a reason, right? But I think this team will respond well. I really do. I think Lynne has them very focused in, and I think just they on their own are
Mhm.
really focused in. I think this is a group that just kind of understands the assignment and understands the expectation and what it takes to kind of be at that top elite spot. Even with them kind of being new in this arena, in this area, being
Yep.
quite where they're at. I just think there's an understanding that it takes hard work, it takes dedication. There are no days off. You can't sit and feel sorry for yourself. And this is a group that's kind of demonstrated that they live and die by that game in and game out. As you
Mhm.
mentioned, they haven't ever lost back-to-back games or weeks this past season. They're undefeated at home. They have the resume. They've been plenty of top 25 teams. So
Yes.
I just none of this should be, I think, new to them. Now, coming out on Friday, will it be the prettiest basketball they've played? We'll see.
Mhm.
But I think they should be able to do at least enough to get
Yes.
that win under the belt in
Mhm.
advance to Sunday.
No, I absolutely agree. And as I said, I feel like NC State, Princeton too, whoever it is. Look, we've talked about it a few times now. It's March, anything can happen, but I really do feel good about the way this bracket works out. And once again, if you have to play a 3 seed, I don't have a problem playing a 3 seed where yes, they only, like I said, we only have 2 losses, and it's hard to win over and over again. But at the same time, when you're looking at LSU, the resume isn't exactly there. So I just don't think that's an intimidating opponent or someone they're going to be like, oh, this is an SEC school that's really hard to beat or anything in that regard, because simply put, they just don't look that way. So it's going to be fun and interesting. I think the one thing that makes this team different than last year's team, outside of the fact that they get to host, is Alissa Pili. And we've talked about it a few times on the show, just the difference in what she has meant to this team. But there are a lot of players who, the great players, especially when it turns to March, is when they really have a chance to rise, make a name for themselves, and really step up and be special. And she's been remarkable all season long. You talk about Gianna Neekins, Jenna Johnson, too, getting another run after this, after getting experience last season. And I do feel like Utah has the players that are going to rise up and be ready for this moment, Michelle.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think Alissa Pili has been a game changer for this
Mhm.
team. I think she's brought a new level of attitude uh, and just swagger that maybe was missing. And then, of course, we're talking about last year, most of these women were freshmen.
Mhm.
And when you get into these situations, you don't know what you don't know. Well, they
Mhm.
know they found themselves in this situation last season, as very green youngins that are new to the college game and new to the college experience. And then on top of that, you're on the biggest stage in all of college basketball with the NCAA tournament. And I mean, they made a bit of a run in it.
Yeah.
They made it to game 2, which
Mhm.
is huge for them, and especially having to be on the road, and again, especially, I think, being so young, and so I think they learned a lot from that experience, and yeah, this team is mostly sophomores, but they're very experienced in season sophomores, because they did have to kinda carry the load, and they're carrying the load again this year, and so I do think the roster bodes well. The one thing I will say kind of concerns me a little bit about this team is when you compare them to some of the teams that we absolutely know are elite and really great, they are a little bit undersized.
True.
And I think
Mhm.
we've seen that, catch up to them a little bit. That was a bit of an issue against Washington State. Stanford obviously was a bit of a juggernaut, and they had to be, I thought, a little bit creative to make up for the fact that they are
Mhm.
not as lengthy as Stanford is. And they're going to come face to face with other teams that kind of present that same problem. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do to try and work around that, because they are not the tallest, lengthiest team.
Mhm.
They just aren't. But they do pack a punch.
They definitely do, and that is a great point, especially when you will get some of these teams. I mean, eventually, if they were lucky enough to get to the Final Four, you could run into some teams like South Carolina, who obviously they have a lot of size over there too. So it'll be interesting, but not a lot of teams can shoot it like Utah. So that'll be the interesting thing: is if it's Utah's day, can that offset some of the potential rebounding issues they have? It'll be interesting to see. It's going to be a lot of fun to follow along as March Madness gets underway for the Utes this Friday and Sunday. And then we'll hope they can keep going from there as they continue to advance along in what they hope is a long month for them as they try to win a NCAA championship, which is once again still crazy. We're talking about this after they won 5 games 2 years ago. An incredible turnaround for Coach Lynne Roberts and her team. And it'll be fun to watch to see what they're capable of. We're going to come back in a moment and touch on the corners as we're looking ahead to Utah spring football. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to the point scores, threes drained. You can do lots of different things with FanDuel. They have player props for points, rebounds, assists. You can bet on the money line, the point spread. You can even do exclusive bets like a 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Michelle, looking at spring football now, it's once again crazy that, we're less than a week away from spring ball starting up by the time this episode will be released. It's wild to think about. Looking at the Utah corners in this one, there's no Clark Phillips this year, but I think the first guy that everyone looks to is Zemaiah Vaughn for what he did last year, the opportunities he had, the pass breakups. It feels like he's the kind of guy that's going to be in for a really nice spring. I can already hear Coach Witt, just picture him raving about him after practice when the media is asking him who are some of the guys that stand out. And I really feel like he's ready to be cornerback 1 for this team. And especially just having the chances to talk with him a couple times. And I know this is something you can speak to too, just seems like the kind of guy who's ready and wants this challenge. And I think he's only going to rise and meet it.
Zemaiah is definitely someone I think everybody should keep their eye on. When we talk about actually physically replacing who is opposite JT Broughton. And here's the thing is I think JT actually has a really prime opportunity to maybe show that he is the guy, because Clark kind of, took a lot of the spotlight, and for good reason. I mean, Clark was phenomenal, but I think, that does put a little more of the spotlight and pressure on JT this year. And then whoever plays opposite of him. And I think Zemaiah is certainly one of them. But, you have other guys like Fabian Marks that have shown some really great things and has had to play a lot. And then you have young guys that have kind of, not maybe young guys anymore, but guys kind of below them that have had to, work their way up. A guy like Kane Savage maybe can do something interesting with that open space as well. So and I honestly would not be surprised if they don't run a little bit by committee, that they rotate guys out, keep them fresh. I think they have the depth to do that. And that's probably maybe one of the benefits of, I always talk about, it sucks when you have an entire position group get decimated in a single season, talking about that 2021 season where, they ultimately had to have Mekhi Bernard playing some cornerback for them. But, the benefit of running through everybody is that they all got looks and they all got valuable reps. And so, they are a little more maybe prepared to be guy number 1 if their number gets called. Just because they got that experience. So while it was maybe rough at the time, it's paying dividends now, 2-3 years later.
Absolutely. There's no experience like game experience. Practice can be great, but nothing like getting in the games. And I think that is such a great point that these guys have been able to get that experience too. I love that you brought up a guy like a Kane Savage, who's just a sophomore eligibility wise still, but a guy who's been with this team now for the past 3 seasons. He's hungry for an opportunity after waiting, because look, these guys are okay playing special teams, but they want to play at their natural spot. That's why they came to the University of Utah, is to get those opportunities on the outside. They didn't come just to be a guy on kickoff team who goes and makes plays in the special teams phase of the game. So I think that's a great point too. I think another guy who's really interested is Miles Battle coming over from Ole Miss. We're going to get our first look at him coming this spring. I think he's a guy who's going to be hungry and ready for an opportunity too. So it's going to be really interesting to see. And spring ball is always interesting because they mix and match the different guys basically. But How do you feel like this Utah corner room is going to end up shaking out? Because, like you said, it does really feel like it's Zemaiah, Vaughn, and then JT Broughton too. But then it kind of gets interesting. Miles Battle, Fabian Marks, Kane Savage, all kind of jumbled in there. Smith Snowden and Dejon Staley are not early enrollees, so we will not see them this spring. But once they eventually get up there, I think they'll factor into things too. So I'm really excited to see this Utah cornerback group, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it all shakes out, Michelle.
Yeah, I think it's a deep group, and again, I think because they were so decimated, 2 years ago. I think they're deep, and I think they bring a lot of good experience, and I think a lot of guys are maybe a little further along than you would necessarily expect, like your 2 or your 3 guy that's been sitting behind Clark for a while, but it's because they've had that opportunity to play and get those practice reps because people have been injured. And so, like I said, I think Utah will probably, I mean, obviously they're going to have their starters, right? Whoever it's going to be JT and whoever. I think probably the safe bet is Zemaiah Vaughn, but we'll see what happens. But I think there's going to be a little bit of by committee. I think they're going to try and keep guys fresh through the game. I think they're going to try and mitigate maybe some of those injuries by giving guys some breaks. And like I said, it appears on paper, at least, they have the depth to do that.
They absolutely do. And you have to give breaks to guys. You cannot be out there running around, especially with the guys that the USCs of the world, the Oregons are going to throw out there. It's hard to line up from them for all 48 minutes of a game and just continue to, or excuse me, all 60 minutes of a game and just continue to battle it out like that, just running play after play. You have to be deep. And that is one of the nice things of this group. And it'll be interesting to see how much do guys like Smith Snowden and Dejon Staley, as we inch closer to fall camp, how much are they involved in this rotation? Malone Matalele, of course, no longer with this Utah football team. So there's another piece of depth that they did lose last year. But part of the reason he left because he didn't feel like he was finding playing time because of how much depth there is in this room. So it'll be interesting to see whether it's we feel like it'll be Broughton and Vaughn out there. So often you need 3 guys too. So maybe Miles Battle has the edge right now to be that 3rd guy. But Kane Savage.
He has to battle Sione Vaki though for that.
Oh, Sione Vaki, yes, thank you. I knew I was forgetting someone. Exactly, yeah. Sione Vaki is the guy
for that nickel spot. Exactly. Yeah, so I mean, they have guys, they have dudes for sure. Coach Shaw's done an amazing job, I think, bringing in talent and getting them up and ready to speed.
Yeah, that was a great catch there. Sometimes I still think of him as a safety just because that was what his designation was all season long. But then when you look at the way he played in the Pac-12 championship game, he made a few plays in the Rose Bowl too. He does feel like he's got to stay at nickel, especially because you got guys like Nate Ritchie, Cole Bishop back there at safety. It feels like you're better there than maybe at corner. There's just a little more unsureness because you don't have as many guys that have played as many games. So I definitely agree with you. I think Sione's a guy who's got to stay right there in the nickel spot. And I think with the plays he made last year, you got to keep him there. So I think that's a great point made by you. And it's just going to be interesting to see because there's a lot of talent in this cornerback room come spring ball. And this is a great opportunity for these guys to battle it out, fight it out. This Utah team has some talented receivers, especially battling a guy like Zemaiah Vaughn, or not Zemaiah Vaughn, but Devon Vele. Zemaiah Vaughn will be battling Devon Vele. It's a great opportunity for these guys to get some run and get some race as close. Nothing's like the games, but you can get pretty close with the elite receivers Utah has on the practice field. And all these guys will be trying to measure up to Clark Phillips. We're going to grade Clark and all the other corners for Utah football from last season when we come back in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at UCCU. It's the perfect time to open a low-rate home equity line of credit from UCCU. Over time, the value of your home goes up as you make payments. That balance you owe goes down. The space in between is equity, and it's yours. A UCCU home equity line of credit can put that equity to work for you, like finishing your basement or your yard, or raising your home's value, or paying off high interest loans and getting out of debt faster, or helping with college or weddings, or peace of mind that comes from knowing that you have a low rate line of credit ready for whenever you need it. UCCU will also provide you with your own home equity Visa card, give you instant access to your equity. If you already have home equity with another financial institution, just refinance with UCCU and save. To learn more or to start your application today, visit uccu.com or stop by any branch. UCCU, love where you bank. All right, Michelle, looking at the corners from last season, I think the first guy, before we start grading the group as a whole, let's just start with Clark Phillips. He absolutely has to get an A+. He was sensational. Yeah. I would argue the best defensive back in the country last season for what he did. Just truly remarkable numbers. I think about back to the Oregon State game is one to simply put the best games I've ever seen a corner play. He finished the season overall with 6 interceptions, was involved in a number of huge pass breakups, drew some of the top receivers routinely, like a Jordan Addison. Lots of these other guys ended up facing, and is a guy just who will never be forgotten, honestly, because of not just last season, but just during his memorable 3 years with the program. He was absolutely lights out. So I think the only grade you can give Clark is an A+.
I would agree. And especially when you consider, a guy like Jordan Addison's quite a bit bigger than Clark
Yes.
is. And the fact that Clark was able to cover him and kind of make him a non-factor is huge. And it's an indicator of just how talented Clark is. Clark is so good. And it doesn't matter that he's undersized. Like he just knows how to make a play, and you can't teach that.
No, you can't teach that, and it's just one of the things that make him so special, and I'm sure some people will be listening to this, and they'll be like, "Well, Jordan Addison caught a ball." Well, yeah, I mean, when you're going against a guy for 60 minutes, Jordan Addison is going to
Yeah.
make catches, but Jordan Addison never dominated Utah like we saw him do against other teams where he made some of those game-changing plays over and over again. Sure, he's gonna make a great play. Great players are going to do that,
Yeah.
but also great players hold those guys in checks and make sure that doesn't happen over and over again, and that's exactly what Clark Phillips did. When you're looking at the rest of the room from last year, I think there were lots of ups and downs still. I think that when you look at what guys like JT Broughton did, just kind of coming back in the fold, there were a lot of games where it was really good, and there were other games where it wasn't as good. Zemaiah Vaughn's a guy, I thought there was a lot of good there with him, but then you see things in the Rose Bowl, like it's the holding call in the end zone. It's not ideal, obviously, there too. So when you're looking at the rest of the group overall, grading wise, I think for me, I'll give him a B+. So overall, probably bounce the grades for the corners overall out to an A- because this still was one of the top corner groups in the Pac-12, and what they had to do routinely, especially with Utah struggling to generate pressure sometimes, I thought that put them in a really bad position where they just had to cover all day long, basically. And you, after 5 seconds, it's just really hard to stick with someone who has a certain route he's trying to run and design, and you just have to continue to react. That's hard to do for long stretches of time. So I do feel like this corner group was too much maligned sometimes last season, but I did think there were ups and downs. So I think overall for the group, I would balance my overall grade for the cornerbacks to an A-.
Yeah, I think a B+ A- is probably fair for this group. I thought they did more great things than they did bad things.
I agree.
But as you mentioned, yeah, it was a little bit up and down. I was a little disappointed by Broughton. I expected him to be better, and that's not to say that he wasn't good and that he can't be good. I think he can be. I think he still was maybe a little bit rusty from the time that he missed
1000%.
in the injury. And sometimes that's just the way it goes. I thought he would be a little bit better last year. I expect that to not be an issue this year. I think he's played enough. There's enough reason to be confident in your playmaking abilities again. I would be really surprised if that is an issue this year. I think there were just times that he still doubted himself a little bit, and that's where you saw the mistakes come in. And then, of course, for as much as like a Fabian Marks or a Zemaiah Vaughn have played, still a little on the young side last year. So mistakes are going to be made. You mentioned, key holding call that really was a killer. It's just about, I think, polishing and eliminating some of those, mental errors for this group. It's not that they're not talented. It's not that they don't have the speed and the athleticism to keep up with anyone. I feel like they've more than proved that. I think for this group overall, it's the mental stuff. And just being really solid on a mental level, and just trusting your instincts and trusting that you know what to do when you're out there. But I think I agree. I think this is a good group. I think this is a really good group. I think, again, the depth is there. I think there's a lot of talent to work with, and that can be used and will be used, and hopefully won't get as tested as they were last year. As you mentioned, there were some issues with the front seven, especially towards the beginning of the season, that put a lot of pressure on Utah's backfield. I don't think that will be near the issue it was last year.
I 1000% agree. And there's no obvious superstar on this group. There's no one that we're like, oh yeah, that's the next Clark Phillips. That's the guy who's going to be up for the top corner in college football award. But it could be a better overall room when you look at the 2 and 3 guys, because the 2 and 3 guys are all back basically, and after getting valuable experience from last year. So got to be feeling optimistic about how this Utah corners are feeling going into spring ball. It's going to be fun to see what they can do. And Mitchelle, before we get you out of here, it's going to be fun to see what the Utah Gymnastics team can do as they gear up for Pac-12 play this Saturday night at the Maverick Center. Coming off a tough loss to Oregon State, but still the Beavs, 13th ranked team. This is a Utah Gymnastics team. The team finished 12-3 overall on the season. How are you feeling about this team entering postseason play?
It's going to be kind of interesting. The Pac-12 over the last 3-4 years has gone significantly better overall. And college gymnastics as a whole has gone significantly better overall. And so there used to be a point in time, when you would see someone ranked number 13 and be like, oh, well, Utah's ranked number 4, like there's going to be a very big difference. And that gap is closed. A 13th ranked gymnastics team looks like they should be ranked 13. Yes. It's no longer we're just trying to guess who's next best after like kind of the top 6. Like there are some good teams and there's some good talent being brought into college gymnastics now. So I think it's going to be a little bit tougher than it has been in the past. The good news though is while it's supposedly a neutral field, Utah fans are going to show up to the Maverick Center on Saturday. And so it's going to feel, very much, I think, like a home meet for Utah Gymnastics. And they need to get a couple of key pieces back. I don't know if Grace McCallum is really, that viable. That will be interesting to see, but hopefully they can get Kara Aker back. And that would majorly help, I think, just kind of settle the lineup again and help put the best 6 out there.
I think it definitely would be ideal to get some of those pieces back, as you mentioned. But either way, this is another team that, because it's at the Maverick Center, because of what Coach Farnham has done with this program, fully expect them to make another run at nationals. And it's going to be fun to see what they can do this Saturday. Michelle, March is not just madness because of basketball, gymnastics, spring football starting up, women's basketball, also men's basketball involved in transfer portal stuff now. There's a lot of news going on. And where should people head over to if they want to get the latest on everything Utah athletics?
Yeah, so you can go to our KSL Sports webpage at kslsports.com, click on the Utah Utes in the drop-down menu, and you'll find most of my stuff there. And then, of course, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and it's the same tag at Bodkin KSL Sports.
Make sure you guys head over and check out all that great stuff Michelle has going on. Also, if you guys are in the market for a second listen every day, we recommend you grab your bracket and go listen to Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown with national analysis and insights from our local experts. The Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown has everything you need to make your most informed decisions on your bracket. Find the episode of Locked On College Basketball wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Michelle, we know we both got the women's team going all the way for the women's bracket. What are you feeling in the men's side?
Oh, I filled my bracket out last night and I don't remember who I picked.
Hey, if that doesn't go with everything I talked about us having going on in March, I don't know what does. So
yeah, I'd have to go look it up again. But I know it's kind of one of the traditional powers. So
it's hard not to. Everyone wants to pick upsets and everything, but at the end of the day, the goal is to have the closest to right you can be. And the easiest way to do that is picking the best team. So it makes the most sense for sure. Michelle, thank you for joining us.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening to Locked On Utes, and we'll be back with more Utah content tomorrow.